This workshop of the School Board of Broward County, Florida is now called to order. Please identify the exit doors that are clearly marked for emergency exiting. While in the boardroom, refrain from obstructing the exit doors. All attendees must occupy a seat with the exception of media. Once the boardroom has reached seating capacity, attendees will be directed to a designated overflow area. Upon activation of the fire alarm system, please exit from the room in an orderly fashion and continue to exit the building and remain outside until the authority that has jurisdiction has deemed the building safe to return. I will now introduce the students of Challenger Elementary School to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. All rise, please.
For the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated.
Broward County Public Schools thanks the residents of Broward for supporting the amendment on the Office of Inspector General, reinforcing our commitment to transparency and accountability. This added layer of oversight will help us continue to build trust and integrity in all district operations. As we prepare to begin this school board workshop, we are reminded that our vision is 100% proficiency for all our students. As an A-rated school district, we begin the vital task of sustaining this achievement. We will continue educating all students to reach their highest potential. Our theme this year is Believe, Empower, Achieve, One Broward. Today's workshop will operate in accordance with School Board Policy 1020, and the board will review the items as advertised and presented by the superintendent. Our first item for discussion is the Bond Oversight Committee Report, Fiscal Year 24, Quarter 4. I now turn it over to staff for a brief presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Hickson. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over for the Bond Oversight Committee to Mr. Shin.
Thank you and good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Superintendent, and the board. The Bond Oversight Committee met on September 19th to discuss the report that's provided. I think since then, the board has had updates on the SMART program and workshops. So I just wanted to present basically what the Bond Oversight Committee motions were. Mr. William Tracy was supposed to be here. I think he's on his way. Hopefully he'll be here shortly. But I can go through what's the committee motions are and sort of the action that we've taken on as staff to respond to those motions. The committee first motion was to recommend the district re-engage conversations with Florida Tax Watch to continue oversight and review of the SMART program. We've been in contact with Tax Watch, and they have told us that they do not have the resources to continue to do the oversight. However, I reached out to our chief auditor, Mr. Dave Rhodes, to sort of confirm that they will continue and present at each quarterly meeting for the Bond Oversight Committee to present any recommendations as it pertains to audits or anything with oversight recommendations. The second motion, the committee recommended that the district revise the resolution to reduce the membership to 5 members that are currently in place. Staff reviewed this recommendation, and we recommended to reduce it down to 7 members. And that's because of where we're at in the program. A couple of the members, the Florida Bar, and the other one that deals with special needs would be more useful when the scopes are still being formed of these projects. The scopes are fully formed, and we're continuing with the program more than halfway through the construction phases of a lot of these projects. The ones that we kept that are not filled are the minority builder and the construction, anybody with construction contracting experience. And for reasons that if we were able to fill those roles, that we felt that it was important to be able to have that available. We also recommended that the quorum be reduced to 3. We're sort of still looking at this, so we'll discuss that a little bit later. The next motion is the committee recommends the district develop a policy to address architectural engineering errors and/or omissions. As you know, we've been looking into our errors and omissions policy, and there are some recommendations. I know that facilities can go into more detail on those. The next motion was the committee recommends that the district revise the current change order policy and increase the cumulative limit for superintendent approval from 3 to 5%. And then there are some recommendations below. And I believe that was all the committee motions. And I think we had a pretty good meeting with some good recommendations during the meeting. So I'll you have a copy of the report and the materials that were presented at the meeting. So I can open it up for board comments.
Thank you very much. Is there any public comment?
No public comment.
Thank you. Board discussion? Any of my colleagues? Oh, Ms. Leonardi.
I have a few questions, but my first is, to what extent did staff have discussions with the committee about their motions and staff's differing take on the motions?
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I know that there was discussion during the meeting about these motions, particularly around the last two. There's been ongoing discussion about errors and omission, and the last motion. And I've also, in addition to that, provided them a copy of the recommendation and discussed it with Mr. Tracy, who was supposed to be here.
Okay, and can someone provide some of the, I don't know, like a summary of those conversations? Because what I don't want to happen is, like, we had this discussion at the last school board meeting, right? Like, the committee makes motions, staff has a differing opinion, and there was no, like, back and forth about it and no general, like, agreement. So I'm just curious about how the committee feels about staff's recommendations.
I believe that in my conversations that the committee is in support of the recommendations and believe that we're utilizing their input to provide changes to the program.
Okay. And then on motion 1, the staff's recommendation for the Office of the Chief Auditor to provide quarterly updates of audit recommendations. I guess I'm wondering, because there's always a conversation about, like, the capacity of the Chief Auditor's office. So I'm wondering if that is within the capacity of the office.
Dr. Hepburn.
I think that's Mr. Rhodes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. We have external resources that we're about to mobilize, and those resources would help us to get the audit coverage, which would then allow me to be able to give some summarized information to the committee, which would really only take my input with regard to, like, let's say there's evening bond oversight committee meetings. I can go there and I can pass on the information and the specifics of the audit findings and the audit recommendations that have been made throughout the course of that work.
Okay. I mean, I certainly am not opposed to having the Office of the Chief Auditor involved in this. I do, however, appreciate the external lens of Florida Tax Watch and the historical knowledge that they have. So I'm wondering if we could go into a little bit more detail about why we wouldn't re-engage them.
Yes, absolutely. And then, Mr. Chairman, you can add. I know Florida Tax Watch, I've talked to their leadership quite often, probably in the past 3 or 4 months. They don't have the resources. They haven't been receiving the resources that they've received in probably 5 or 6 years ago during that time of the program. I've done my due diligence based on some of the entities they've received resources from to try and re-engage them to get resources, and nobody's willing to pony up any resources to support it.
Okay. Okay, so with that understanding, I obviously support the chief auditor being involved in this and providing some updates and reports and oversight. The change order policy, I support making that change. I do, however, feel like this is a conversation we've had for years and years and years. And we've changed the policy in the past, and it still hasn't gotten to the core of the issue. So, I think we've all kind of beaten this drum that the change orders are an issue, the time to completion is an issue. So I hope that we dig deeper on that, and I know that the superintendent is interested in doing that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Zeman?
Thanks, Chair. We're, just to provide a little bit more context that we didn't hear from our speaker this morning, there's 359 days left in the SMART bond. It'll end of October 2025. Is that correct, Chair?
Dr. Hepburn?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. And given that, it's not surprising that we're losing people's interest in it. I think our responsibility, as Ms. Leonardi is inferring, is to make sure there's really appropriate oversight to the last 359th day from now. If Tax Watch doesn't have their available resources do it and the auditor can pick that up, that's great. But I would want to make sure that what the auditor is doing with external resources is equivalent to what Tax Watch was doing for the balance of time. So just as a follow-up item to our chief auditor, maybe if you could let us know if the external resources are 100% covering what Tax Watch was doing. I love the idea of hiring external resources to do this because it's a limited time, and as it's expiring, it may be difficult to find organizations like Tax Watch or any other do-good government group to pick that up. But it's a big deal. 3 grand juries have talked about our oversight on this program, and we have to make sure that we continue to do that very, very well. In terms of the specific items, like Ms. Leonardi, I support them, and I really support quickly coming back to the board with an item to change the superintendent's authorities. We had the intent of not seeing $10,000, $12,000, $20,000 change orders because an electrical outlet had to be moved 40 feet away, or they had to rewire a wall that they didn't know about beforehand and things like that. But what we didn't understand is we also had this second limit of 3%, and if you had already changed 5 or 6% of a project, then every dollar has to come all the way to the board. I don't think the community likes that. I know that it takes up time of staff, and more importantly, it slows down progress. Oftentimes they have to wait 30 days to get to the board to get on the agenda. Then we hear it and we vote on it and we're like, really? $12,000 because you had to move an outlet? Like, why did we lose 30 days when kids really want their library? So if we can bring one back that does that, and I'll just remind my colleagues, there were 3 factors. There was $250,000 limit, 3%, which the Bond Oversight Committee is recommending moving to 5%, and the superintendent provide us updates when he makes decisions like that are within the caps. And I think that's a good issue to bring back to the board based on the recommendation. The only question I have for you, Omar, though, is what's the limiting factor of getting great people to serve on the Bond Oversight Committee? I work with hundreds and hundreds of construction leaders in the community. They're like really vested in Broward County Schools. They're not doing it just for the money. I mean, they're running a company, or maybe they used to run a company and they're still living here. Why can't we get construction people to fill seats on the bar? Or let me say it differently. What's the limiting factor to getting really, really talented people who want to help us in a volunteer capacity to serve in these seats on the Bond Oversight Committee for the next year?
Dr. Hepburn.
Mr. Shim.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think one of the limiting factors, and this is because I've been trying to reach out to a number of people from the minority builders area, and when I do contact them, a lot of the limitations is that they're actually trying to do business with the district, and the resolution actually prohibits you being able to do business while you're sitting on the committee. So that is a limiting factor as to the participation in those two areas, is that, you know, the companies that are interested in helping, you know, would be people that are doing business with the district.
Chair, the only idea I have for us then is for maybe us to nominate some people. There's 9 of us. We all know people that are not trying to do business with Broward County Schools, but probably live here or near here, who care about the final 12 months of executing this bond. And I think if the 9 of us spent a little bit of time, we might get some folks to raise their hand and do that. So just as an idea for you and our permanent chair to think about is if we could be tasked back with finding some people, I think we could fill up that board. I would just much rather have a full board, an auditor replacing Tax Watch, and finish strongly on the smart bond, rather than limp to the finish line because we didn't figure out the limiting factors and figure out how to overcome them, and didn't have full resources available to take the place of Tax Watch. My own opinion is we need to finish strong on the smart bond and make sure that we show the community that we heard them, that we heard the grand juries, and we're going to finish this up with great attention to the details for the next 12 months. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Zeman. Dr. Hepburn, how would we as board members go about making suggestions to fill those 2 positions, or what's the procedure for that?
Mrs. Shim, if you can enlighten us on the current process, and then how could we change the process to allow board members to appoint, essentially? I think that's what you're asking, to appoint.
Not even appoint, just so I'm clear. Just, hey, here's 3 people I know that fit the requirements of the job. You know, I just want them to be in the pool to be considered.
Gotcha.
For whomever makes the appointment. It's really just to kind of broaden the pool a little bit.
Yes, and currently we take recommendations from any source.
Even a school board member.
Right, that's correct. And we ask for a resume to support the qualifications behind the resolution, and then we bring it to the committee, and the committee makes a decision. You know, they vote to approve membership. So that's the current process. So I think that if the board provided that feedback, that certainly would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So just everyone's clear. They could just send you an email with some suggestions and contact information, and then you would take it from there.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Holness?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to clarify that the recommendation to reduce to 5 is because of difficulty in filling those other positions?
Dr. Hepburn?
Mr. Shim?
That's correct.
Okay, and can you reiterate your efforts that have been in place to fill these positions in the past?
I've reached out to, for the minority builder, our current and past, Ms. Mincy Mills. We've spoken. I've gotten recommendations and reached out to those recommendations, and they've declined to pursue it based upon what's required as far as not doing business with the district and things like that. And then the construction, I've also reached out to people for that. And, basically, in that role, it would be somebody retired, somebody working for another governmental agency, and I've reached out to other governmental agencies, reached out to colleges and things like that. So that's really the extent of my effort. And I've, of course, during every meeting possible, I've asked for input and for anybody to provide suggestions into filling these roles.
Okay, so currently with these 5 members that fill the current positions that we have, what is the quorum that's required?
Dr. Hepburn.
Mr. Shim.
The quorum that's required is a majority of the members. There is something in the resolution that allows the membership to be altered with less than the full amount, the full quorum. I think it's 4 to vote in new members.
Okay, so do you currently experience difficulty in meeting quorum?
Dr. Hepburn.
Mr. Shim.
Yes.
Okay. And my last question on this particular recommendation is the 2 vacant position. Can you elaborate on what you see as the relevance and benefit of having these 2 positions contributing to the membership?
Mr. Shim.
Yes, because of where we're at in the program is really what we looked at in terms of what would be beneficial to going forward. And those 2 are related to the construction phases that we're currently in and would provide very useful input for the committee if they were filled.
Okay. So Dr. Hepburn, I personally would like to see extensive effort in place to fill the 2 positions without reducing the membership. And I like Dr. Zeman's suggestion as well, where board members can give recommendation in filling these positions, but I certainly would not like to eliminate them. I think he wants to speak.
Mr. Shim.
Yes, just for clarification, we are recommending keeping 2 unfilled positions on the committee and recommending taking away 2 unfilled positions. And the 2 unfilled positions that are not being recommended in the version of the resolution that we're providing is because those positions have more to do with the designing and before the scopes are fully formed. One of them is a Florida bar position. Right. And the other one is one for special needs, which, you know, we do think that was an important role. But now that you're in full swing and almost halfway through or more than halfway through the program, a lot of that would be a lot less useful information at this point in time in the program.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I support the staff recommendation of the 7.
Thank you. Mrs. Pham.
Thank you. Just a few points of clarification, if you wouldn't mind, sir. In the past, I have had an individual that really wanted to participate in the audit committee, not the oversight committee, the audit committee, but they're an international auditor, and they travel all over the world, and they were not permitted to appear by Zoom. They had to be there in person. I know, if I'm correct, that you meet quarterly. I just want to make sure. So the commitment would be to 4 times a year. Other than that, is there anything else? And are they date certain where people that do travel around the world that can make a major contribution in this oversight can participate? So, yeah, I mean,
Dr. Hepburn.
Clarify.
Mr. Shim.
The committee sets the dates that they will meet once a year, usually after the last final meeting. At the next meeting, they confirm the dates that they will meet quarterly throughout the rest of the year. So I believe that's definitely accommodative to what you're suggesting.
Thank you. So they would get approximately how much notice in advance? I mean, so they would have you providing the dates for the entire year, so that way they could plan their travel accordingly?
Dr. Hepburn.
Mr. Shim.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Rhodes, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that in this item, the committee is recommending reducing the membership to 5 members, and staff is recommending membership at 7 individuals and with a quorum of 3. The quorum of 3, according to the statutes, would work for 5 members, but it might need to be increased to 4 for membership of 7. I've brought the statute to the attention of council, and I've also discussed it with Mr. Shim, and he's already on working on that and plans to bring that to the next meeting to discuss that.
Okay, Ms. Jacques Adams, can you?
Sure. The relevant statute is Florida Statutes 455.207, and that requires 51% to meet quorum for not only the board, but also the board committees. So it would, whatever the number lands on, it would need to be 51% to meet quorum.
Okay, so Mr. Shim, we're in a workshop, so when it comes back to us, it would come back meeting state statutes, correct? Okay.
Mr. Shim?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Pham, did you have anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Before I go back to round 2, I just want to say I'm very, as you know, because you're smiling already, very happy to see motion 3 because it's been a concern that I've had. It's been a concern Tax Watch has had when you go through the change orders and there are errors or omissions on the drawing side or the beginning part of it, and we have to eat the difference there, and it wasn't something we asked for, it was just something they didn't do. I do believe that we should not be paying all of the change order for that, and I know it comes out in the wash later, so I've been through this process, but I am very happy to see that motion, and I do look forward to seeing the policy come forward, even though we're close to the end of it, because there are a lot of, in fact, in our next meeting coming up, it's very clear that it was something that was done in error in the very beginning, and we shouldn't be held accountable financially for someone else's mistake. So I just want to put my 2 cents in for that. Mrs. Leonardi?
I just had a quick question. I'm wondering to what extent the district has reached out to like professional groups like the Associated General Contractors of America, Association of Associate Builders and Contractors, Broward Builders, Gold Coast Builders Association, to get their input as people who do business in South Florida.
Dr. Hepburn?
Mr. Shim?
I have reached out in the past to these entities. I think the last time I did it was last year. Some of the entities, not all of the ones that you mentioned, but I can do it again.
I mean, I think I've said this before about, reaching out to vendors and businesses that maybe don't do business with the school district or who used to and who have left us. Like, I think there needs to be a regular cadence of meeting with these professional groups, the people who we're trying to get to work for us, to get their input about what we could be doing better. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Dr. Zeman?
I just want to be clear, Chair. What vacancies are there that would get them to 7? What are the specific seats that you need, Omar? And again, I'm not necessarily needing it in today's meeting, but if you could send us all a note through the chair to just give us any specifics about deadlines, qualifications, anything we need to know, we could probably at least look in our networks and kind of come up with some candidates. And even if we just come up with 1 or 2 each, that's a pretty big pool, and we can fill that up. But I just want to be clear, we have 2 vacant seats to get to 7. Is that correct?
If you look on page 3 of the presentation, it tells you the 2 vacancies that we need to fill, but you're asking for a little more than just that.
Yeah.
So Dr. Hepburn.
Mr. Shim?
Yes, I can provide more of the criteria as far as what's in the resolution and more of the process in a follow-up so that you have that.
Yeah, terrific. And I love Ms. Leonardi's point about the groups. It is critical. I'm hearing from those groups that our new Chief Facilities Officer has done a lot of outreach, which is great. And I just want to make sure that that those groups know that we have a chief facilities officer and they can reach her, and I know she's reaching out to talk to them. And it's critical for us. We cannot continue to do $30 million government contracts with one bidder, which is what we did last year. That's not where we want to stay. We want to have 5 or 10 organizations bidding for all of our work so that we get best value and best speed for our kids. Thanks so much, Omar.
Thank you. Dr. Holness?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on revising policy 8000, can staff speak to the committee's recommendation in terms of the current change order policy and increasing the cumulative limit of the superintendent approval from 3 to 5%? Can staff expound on how this will be beneficial and if there are any cons to doing so?
Dr. Hepburn?
Yes, I'll start and then Mr. Shim can finish, but simply put, it'll reduce the number of low-dollar items for change orders, because I had the same question early on. I remember the revision of the policy, I think, last school year, and then, stepping into the season like, gosh, why are these $5, $8, $10,000 items for change orders keep coming to the board? And we discovered it's cumulative 3% of the project, and if you have already gone over that, you have to keep bringing it no matter if it's $1. Or in some cases, we're actually getting money back. It's not an expense to the school district. You're actually receiving money back from an actual change order. So I'll let Mr. Shim kind of elaborate a little bit more.
Okay, and Dr. Hepburn, also if you could speak to any drawbacks in doing so, if that exists.
No drawbacks on my end. I think, as Dr. Zeman mentioned earlier, some of the items are very simple, and then it's holding up the process for 30 or more days to complete something that's very simple, and when it could be done with speed, if I could actually sign off and get the work to start flowing back so things can get done quicker, and some of the simple things that we bring to the board.
Okay, and Mr. Shim, if you could speak to both pros and cons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the change that we did make for the change order policy has been received well, and it has helped with where we're at. And I think this recommendation would further that and put us in a better position to approve those, and exactly what the superintendent said. As far as the drawbacks, I don't really see anything as a drawback in this policy.
Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Shim, for the presentation. The next item is the School Board Policy 5090, the Code of Student Conduct. I will now turn it over to staff for a brief presentation. We'll just give them a minute to switch out.
Yes, in addition to what is captured in the agenda, Mr. Hill will be passing out some supplemental data that's broken down by school level for survey topics that we were able to acquire recently working with our vendor for the survey.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Simone Hollingsworth, Chief Academic Officer, and as Dr. Hepburn mentioned, we are going to go over the presentation and some survey results and then open for questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Jody Washington, Dr. Jody Washington, our task assigned Executive Director of Student Support Services.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Dr. Washington.
All right, there we go. All right, so today we are going to talk about the rule governing the use of wireless communication devices in schools, which is embedded within Policy 5090, the Code of Student Conduct. This is just a reminder of the rulemaking process as it relates to policy. Just a brief review of the timeline that the Code of Student Conduct has undergone since April. In April, we brought it to the first rulemaking workshop based on feedback from the Discipline Committee. During that rulemaking workshop, the board provided guidance to district staff to go back to the community to look at strengthening the consequences for specific acts against persons. Did that during the months of April and May, and then during the June rule development workshop is when the discussion about the wireless communication devices was a topic of conversation, and the board directed staff to make changes to the rule governing the wireless communication devices. And then that rule was subsequently adopted in July. And then on the October 15th board meeting, the board asked staff to survey the community and bring the item back for discussion in a rule development workshop. So that's what brings us here today for this rule development workshop as it relates to the policy. This is just the policy as it currently stands in the Code of Student Conduct. Again, the major revision that was made over the summer and adopted in July was a change to the definition of instructional time for grades 6 through 12. Previously, instructional time in grades 6 through 12 was time during class, but did not include class change and lunch. Now, instructional time is defined as time from the first bell of the day to the last bell of the school day. It has always been in policy that students can use their cell phone under the direction of a teacher, and that is in alignment with Florida statute as well. Here is a 3-year data trend for our elementary school students for violations of the cell phone rule. It is broken down by quarter, so the blue is 2023, orange is 2024, and green is 2025. We only analyzed this year through the first quarter because we are just in the beginning stages of the second quarter. So you can see for the elementary level, from the last 2 years, there has not been a change. Here is the middle school. You can see an uptick in the number of cell phone violations for middle school students in the first quarter. And then for high school, again, an uptick in the number of cell phone violations in the first quarter for this year. This is an outline of the interventions and consequences that have accompanied those cell phone violations. You'll see in the cases where we have violations, a parent conference is the most frequently used intervention. Also keep in mind that these interventions and consequences that are here, many times there will be a parent conference and a verbal warning, or parent conference and confiscation. When it gets to the external suspensions, there's 8 students who have been externally suspended this year for a cell phone violation. Those are repeated violations, repeated defiance of the policy. Students do not get suspended from school for merely using their wireless device. It is repeated defiance of the policy and directives from school staff. We'll get to the data in the appendix if you want me to go through that. Did you want me to discuss the data in the appendix, or? Yes?
Yes, since we just gave it to them, my apologies. We were able to work with the vendor to get that data, and they got it to us late, and Ms. Washington gracefully stayed up all night, put it together for us. So,
thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Since they just received it, if you can go through it, please. And then for the public, we will update the item online just to make sure the public can review this.
So do you want me to, there's data that's not disaggregated by level in the back of the presentation, or do you want me to go through the Word documents that, let's see. So this is just an outline of the survey engagement. The survey went out to students. It was available on their Clever dashboard. There was also a global announcement that went out to all students in Canvas. Not all students, I'm sorry, middle school and high school students, because the rule did not impact elementary school students. The rule for elementary school has always been instructional time as the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So this rule change only impacted our middle and high school students. So we only surveyed our middle and high school students. You'll see that we had nearly 28,000 students that responded to the survey, about a 26% response rate of the eligible student population. Parents, we had nearly 40,000 parents respond, about a 20% response rate per the number of students that are registered in Broward schools. And then for staff, we had just over 6,000 respondents, which was a 23% response rate. The next question was about the awareness, seeking the awareness of each of the different demographics of, did you know that this policy had changed? And you can see for the most part, people were very aware of the change to policy. The next question asked to what extent they agreed with the policy change restricting the use of wireless devices during class changes. The green are the students, the orange is the staff, or the orange is the parents, I'm sorry, and blue is the staff. So you can see where we lie there. We have some agreement among parents and staff, but some strong disagreement for students for class changes. And then during lunchtime, you can see even more student disagreement and even some more parent disagreement restricting students' ability to use their wireless devices during lunchtime. When asked how the cell phone policy affected the students' learning experience, the majority of respondents for students and parents said that this policy change has had no impact on their student learning experience. When asked about the concerns, if they had any concerns, you can see that the majority overall had concerns about being able to communicate with family during the school day, as well as safety. There was also on the parent and staff survey, if they selected other, there was an opportunity for them to put in a written response. And we did have over 4,000 responses that had some text in other. So I used Microsoft Copilot AI to give us the emerging themes that came from that data set. And so these 5 themes that you will see on the next 2 slides were what was generated through the use of AI. The next question, how do you believe the cell phone restriction has impacted your students' well-being, or as the student, their own well-being? And you can see that there's kind of a mix of responses there between negatively and no impact for our students, and just a different perception of staff. How effective do you think the enforcement of the policy has been in your school? And there was a surprising number of neutral there. People didn't necessarily think it was effective or ineffective. And then the satisfaction of the implementation, and not surprisingly, based on what we've heard from our students, they were very dissatisfied with the implementation of the policy. And then beyond instructional time, this question just asked if they felt that beyond time in the classroom, there should be any additional restrictions. And you can see that overwhelmingly, our students don't want any additional restrictions, or they selected other. And in their other responses, they said no additional restrictions. But you can also see there with students overwhelmingly are asking that we don't restrict during lunchtime based on their survey responses. And then again, there were 2 open-ended questions at the end of the survey. Both of them had over 2,000 responses. So I used AI to theme those and find the top 5 emerging themes from the other responses from the parent and staff survey. And then the parents and staff using Thought Exchange, the AI that's embedded within Thought Exchange will give you both sides as well as some common ground for your consideration. So when asked about suggestions for improvement to the policy, you can see that the common ground on both sides of it was everybody's kind of on the same page of making sure that students have emergency access to their phone. And then when asking any additional thoughts that weren't maybe captured in another question, again, the common ground is making sure that students have emergency access. And then the data that you received this morning was all of these same survey questions, but broken down parents by level elementary, middle, high, combination K to 8, and combination 6 to 12. Same thing for staff. And then for the student data, since we only surveyed middle and high school students, the middle school was disaggregated from the high school. So that is the additional documentation that you received this morning. And with that, I think that's the end.
Okay, do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
Thank you. Okay, board members? Okay, Mrs. Pham?
Thank you. Sorry. If I can, I would like clarification. When an emergency happens, you're assuming that it's a student wanting to call their parent or a parent trying to get a hold of a student. What about when we have, in some cases, it's schools, we've had some riots break out and some other incidents where there's violence or fighting. Are students permitted to take out their phones and document the policy, the breaking of these policies or the breaking of these laws? Because some of these acts are criminal. In order to preserve that evidence, so it's not a he said, she said interrogation when considering evidence. So is that permissible for them to do that?
Dr. Hepburn.
So just want to clarify, don't know about riots on campus. Physical altercations between students, yes, not a new phenomenon. But there's a very thin line between students holding up their cell phones and filming altercations or other negative incidents on campus versus trying to do that in a way where they're genuinely concerned and want to use that for evidence to give to an administrator. Administrators do collect information from kids via verbally written statements, or if they have a cell phone video, looking at that video and recording that video. But most administrators, we don't want students out and about just we see that in the real world too, right? If something's happening, instead of somebody doing something about it to get help, they pull out their cell phones and let it continue to happen. And that's not what we're trying to encourage, nor the encouragement of students setting up things for it to be recorded. So it's a very thin line. Absolutely, yes, our administrators collect information from students, verbally written, and if they have a cell phone video. But we try to err on the side of, hey, if you see something, immediately go let the closest adult know, get away from harm's way, go back to your area, your class, and not crowding and making the situation worse than it is when it was initiated.
So to clarify, you're saying no, that you would not encourage people to
Absolutely
videotape?
not. No.
Mrs. Leonardi.
Sorry. To that point, to what extent do we rely on surveillance footage from our schools to, get to the bottom of what happened in an altercation?
Oh, we depend on it a lot. So oftentimes it's simultaneous. One person's getting information from a student, the other person is actually looking at surveillance video that pretty much captures everything around campus.
Right. And then help me understand, what are the consequences if a student sees a fight and they film the fight and then they share that video? What are the consequences to that student?
There is consequences. I'll let Ms. Washington clarify based on the student code of conduct, but there is consequences for that.
Yeah, so it depends on the outcome of the sharing. In some cases, it may create a major disruption on campus the next day, in which case they would be disciplined under a major campus disruption. It could incite a disturbance, in which case they would be disciplined under that. So it really depends on what that resultant action is from them sharing. It could be as simple as an unruly disruptive behavior that doesn't result in something larger, but there are definitions within the code of conduct that the behavior fits.
Got it. And are there any legal consequences, like with law enforcement?
Go ahead, Ms. Washington.
So I would.
Dr. Washington,
Yeah.
I apologize.
No,
She's
it's
recently
okay.
got a doctorate.
I'm still trying to get used to that part. I would defer to the law enforcement, but again, if it causes a major campus disruption, then law enforcement, that is reported to law enforcement. It's an assessor incident, and they can take whatever action they deem necessary to take in that situation. So I think it's contextual, depending on what happens as a result of that sharing.
Are there contexts in which a student films a fight, shares that video, and there are legal consequences? Are there situations where that could happen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And also just to add to some of the other symptoms of situations like that where students are intentionally filming a fight or physical altercation, just the mental health issues that it causes for the student that actually made a mistake, got into a physical altercation, and a student purposely posts that to so-called try to bully or intimidate or just put information out on the web that sometimes can never, ever disappear. So you have those side effects also.
Okay. And to be clear, we do have surveillance cameras all over our campuses that capture these incidents.
Yes, that's correct.
Got it. Thank you. I got your email, Dr. Hepburn, but I was a little bit frustrated about getting these survey results so late. Can you explain why we got these results so late?
Yes, so we were working with the vendor that we used to collect the survey information. There was some difficult time in trying to get the data collated and stratified to do all the things that need to be done. Dr. Washington was amazing in communicating with them and was able to put together the data in a way that could be understood and visible to the public today. So I apologize for that, but some frustration on our end too, working with the vendor.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I will just say, it's been my experience as a board member for 4 years that sometimes we get information very late.
Yeah.
And I understand, I'm not trying to cast blame or scold anyone, and I appreciate how hard you all worked to get this information to us. I would just say, as a systemic issue, getting the information as soon as possible ahead of a board meeting is helpful. I think I have some more comments later on in a second round. I do want to flag that we started this workshop a little bit early, and I think there may have been people who are trying to get here for public comment. So I don't know. That's up to you, Madam Chair. But I just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'll let all the board members finish, and then I'll see who's here for public comments. Dr. Holness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a few questions. In terms of teacher-directed cell phone use for instructional purposes, how well is this being communicated to principal, school leadership, teachers, and so on? As I've heard in the past where some teachers may be reluctant to even consider use for instructional purposes. We have many students, for example, who are in study hall, and part of their assignments or research or accessing is done through their cell phone. But there are many teachers and staff who are reluctant to allow this in order to not get in any kind of what they believe to be violating the policy. So how well are we communicating this to principal, school leadership, and how well are they communicating this to the instructional staff that they can allow students, whether in study hall or in regular classes, to use the cell phone for instructional purposes if it's a part of their instruction for the day? They have certain games, for example, educational games that they use the cell phones to play and so on. I just don't want it to be a situation where teachers are limiting the use of technology in the maximizing the learning outcome of students because of fear of violating this policy. So if the superintendent could comment on that, and what else can we do to ensure, to increase awareness that they can do this?
Dr. Hepburn.
Yes, so we've communicated that to school leadership and funneled down to the teachers also. I know we even developed a flyer to send out that clearly communicates that to all staff. I know we're always going to have some teachers that are erring on the side of caution and have some misunderstanding, and I know it's very few versus the majority. And plus, we're putting some things in place to alleviate that concern by ensuring that we can go one-to-one after Mr. Davis, our CIO, has really dove into our inventory and really understand how many laptop computers we have within the district. So that concern will be alleviated soon once we start transitioning to that. But I think right now, as far as teachers with that type of specific concern is probably very few versus, you know, the many in the beginning of the year, because we've been communicating that to our principals and assistant principals and so forth for some time now.
Okay, and Dr. Hepburn, I've also heard from students as well, especially those in study hall where the cell phone use may not be allowed by the study hall instructional staff, but the students found it in the past to be significantly beneficial in studying, in looking up different words and meanings and whatever else they need to do as far as completing their work during study hall, because study hall is a space where they can complete additional assignments, they can do additional research, they can use it for enrichment purposes, and so on and so forth. And my understanding is that the cell phone in study hall in the past was being used to enhance their learning. But there are study hall teachers that may prohibit the use, even though the student is intending on using it for instructional enhancement. So how do we educate those teachers to really have a degree of latitude so students can continue to maintain the level of service they need? And can we ascertain that if study hall teachers are not allowing this, or some of them, that all study hall rooms in our entire school district have availability of computers for every single student who needs to utilize that time and that space?
Yeah,
Dr. Hepburn.
Absolutely. So I think there's two folds to that answer. One, we'll continue to communicate to all of our employees, school-based employees specifically. The other part is that we've afforded the autonomy to teachers, and I think in that case that teachers exercising that autonomy in a not so structured environment in a study hall, that teacher may say, hey, I'm noticing that kids are not actually doing schoolwork, they're doing other things, so I'm not going to allow cell phone use in the classroom. And we've afforded teachers that autonomy, and they have that autonomy based on current legislation. And the second fold is absolutely Dr. Fulton, Mr. Davis are working together to assist our schools. We'll do that in a very strategic way to start getting devices in all of our students' hands, so we don't have that problem of if a teacher has 40 kids in study hall and they only have 30 laptops in their carts. So we'll start incrementally chopping away at that problem.
Okay, so not meaning to be contradictory, but we could encounter the same issue, right? If you have 40 kids in a study hall and they all have computers, unless you're monitoring each and every one of them, they could be doing other things on the computer that's not necessarily academic related, or...
But we have filters.
So we have filters. Yes. Got it. Okay. Understand. Yes. So I think my concern, Dr. Hepburn, would be, and I hope we can move in that direction, at the very least to ensure that every study hall in the district has computers for every single kid in that room. Otherwise, the space would not be used efficiently, and I don't think it would be to the best interest of students if we don't afford them the technology to do so. So I have another question. I have some concerns about prohibiting the use of the cell phone during lunchtime, and I'm looking at the data that we just received as well as the data that we have here. And it appears to me that parents, when you look at the data for parents broken down by school levels, that parents seem to strongly disagree and also disagree. There seems to be substantial numbers and percentages here. When the question was asked, to what extent do you agree with the policy change restricting students' use of the device during the school day, including during lunchtime? So this seems to have a different response outcome as opposed to restricting it during class time. My concern here is how much are we, of course the students would want to use it during lunchtime, but we also need to consider the input of the parents who are in the results here are indicating that it's okay with them, at least that's how I'm reading it, to have students use it during their lunchtime. And I guess my question is, can you speak to any kind of research that would indicate that not allowing students to use cell phone during lunchtime is any more beneficial than allowing them to use it during lunchtime?
Dr. Hepburn.
Yep, so I can't speak to specific research around lunchtime. I can speak to specific research around not allowing students to utilize cell phones during the entire school day, which is proved to be beneficial for performance, mental health, and other variables. I haven't seen any research that talked about a specific time during the school day, be it lunch, class change, or any other time frame within the school day.
Okay, so Dr. Hepburn, would you agree then that our restriction of the use of cell phone during lunchtime, assuming there's any benefit, is rather subjective?
I'm going to be honest with the board. It's November. I don't think we've gone through an entire school year. This decision was made earlier in the summer, and we're going through this now. I think at the end of the school year, staff can collect all type of data, student performance data, correlate data to all type of aspects, mental health and things like that. As we know the seasons of the school year, we know what kids engage in, we know the negative, the positives, and all the other good stuff that we can present to the school board at the end of the year to say, hey, here's the data that we have thus far. These cell phones, many of our students have had cell phones since birth, all right, even when they were toddlers. So at this point in time of the year, I don't expect students to say, or parents of high schoolers to say, right, that they don't want their kids to have cell phones. I think at the end of the school year, once we've gone through an entire school year, once we start embedding some things in culture, once we start looking at correlative data, associating trends and things like that, we can better answer that question. But at this moment in time, we can't answer that question.
Thank you, and that's a fair response. But I would also say that in terms of students' mental health, then based upon the response, that we cannot necessarily say restricting use during lunchtime support or not support mental health. It could actually have the counter effect where it does not support mental health, as well as it could support mental health, but we don't have any data that would suggest that, and I need one more minute and then I'm done. And also, Dr. Hepburn, I'm sure there are other school districts that have implemented this, right? So in those other school districts, do we have any information on whether or not restricting during lunchtime is supportive of a student well-being as opposed to being counterproductive to that student well-being? Because this is a culture of technology that, well, I'm not going to age myself, but that I may not necessarily have been brought up in when I was a child. And so how do we ascertain that this actually supports their mental health as opposed to being destructive to their mental health in not having access at all?
Dr. Hepburn.
That was a long question, Dr. Holness. See if I can remember parts of it. So the only school district that I know of in the state of Florida that has a all-day school-wide ban where students don't have access to their cell phones at all, right? Remember, we do give access to our students, access to the cell phones by our students by allowing them to put it on airplane mode, and they can take it off airplane mode if they need to use it for an emergency or whatnot. But in Orange County, which is the only school district I'm familiar with in the state of Florida, that has implemented a full cell phone ban from the moment you get on campus to the moment that you leave, they have seen increase in performance. They have seen better engagement by students. They had a rough road, just like us in the beginning, because it is embedded in student culture or children being used to utilizing their cell phones. So they had the same growing pains as we're experiencing right now in the first part of the year when they implemented this ban last year.
Good, and I appreciate that, but they have a school-wide, a district-wide implementation of no cell phones all day, but there has not been any research done to say, well, if we include it in lunchtime, what is the effect on students' learning outcome and so on and so forth, right?
No, no effect specifically to lunchtime.
Okay, and I just, one more thing, Chair, and then I'm done. Okay, I'll just have a concluding comment. I cannot determine whether or not, and we don't have the data, it's obvious that restricting cell phone during lunchtime is beneficial. We have no data to support it. I am concerned about it because I don't know if it's actually productive or not productive. We are in a generation of technology and completely restricting it even during their lunchtime when they are not in instructional time. We have nothing to show that this is actually beneficial. Or it could also not be beneficial. It could go in the opposite direction. We just don't know. So I'm concerned about that. But I'd like to just, if we could just refer to page 15 with the data that was shown in the presentation. I just need clarification of this data because I'm looking at the total staff that is shown here. It says 6,137 respondents from the staff. But I'm looking at page 15, and unless I'm reading this incorrectly, the blue represents staff. So could someone clarify why the staff numbers, for example, strongly disagrees 15,414 on page 15?
Dr. Hepburn.
Dr. Washington?
Sorry, I'm pulling it up. But what I will say is those numbers were pulled directly from Thought Exchange.
Okay.
And Thought Exchange allows parents to complete some questions and not others. So you don't have to do all of it there. We looked at partially and fully completed responses, so that could be part of it, but I'm...
Okay, so the concern though is that we're looking at a staff total respondent of 6,137 in the data that's presented on page 15, which is in contradiction to the rest of the data. The rest of the data seems reasonable because you can add the numbers up and they're close to 6,000. On page 15, you add the staff numbers up and we're looking at probably 30,000.
I will go back to the Thought Exchange data and provide an update to that.
Okay, so I think chart 15 is incorrect.
Okay.
Because it doesn't match the number of respondents for staff. And also the cumulative response that we have here, I would have loved to see it in percentage form like we did with the data that you presented. So what we have here is raw numbers. We don't have percentages, but my brain works in percentages because I can say, okay, 28% agree with this and so on and so forth. Now I'm led to having to figure it out myself, even though I can.
So I can get the percentage numbers to you. Just to back to Dr. Hepburn's point, we were having difficulty with breaking the data apart. We used one survey that had a splicing question in there. They had to say whether they were a parent or a staff member.
Right.
And then to disaggregate the data by each one of those, we had to apply filters. When the filter was applied, it continued to spin and then time out. So we had to use other ways to like put the data, compare two questions, for example. With that one question, then I had to go question by question. So just putting that quick filter on was difficult to present it that way, but I'll get you the percentages the same way. You want it aggregated, like what all the parents said?
Right, well, what's in the presentation seems to be aggregated, right? And then you have this disaggregated data, which shows the percentage. The disaggregated data shows the percentage. The one in the presentation, that's the aggregated data, does not show percentages. So I think it would have been a lot more easier to look at if we had it in percentage form, just like you did in parentheses on the disaggregated data.
So do you want the aggregated data in percentages? Is that what you...
Correct.
Okay.
Just like you have done it here, and if you could revisit slide 15 and correct the staff numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Zeman.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going to tell you how excited I am to sit here and talk about filtering data, though. This is my sweet spot. Thank you very much. And just as a point of professional privilege, I want to congratulate you on your PhD. I did it full time. That's easy. You and Dr. Holness and others did it while you're working full time and not in a 40-hour-a-week job, in a very intense job. And you deserve tremendous accolades for what you've done. So, Dr. Washington, welcome to the team.
Thank you.
I agree with my colleagues about the data, however, and I will point out that we extended the survey. And maybe by extending the survey, we shorten the amount of time left for analysis, and let's just think about that maybe going forward, and whether or not 5% more data is really worth coming in late with some of the critical things. And Dr. Holness and I have the same frustration. To compare the data, we needed the percentages, not the whole numbers, and don't want to flog the hardworking people that did this, but it's really important for the community to be able to digest the results of this survey. So there you go. We talked a lot about this change, and we kind of talked about our 3 strategic goals, again, which an analyst like me just absolutely loves. And we said, what would a cell phone bell-to-bell ban on use with waivers for any of our 14,000 instructional staff to say, yes, you can use it for that purpose right now, right? So we do not have a ban. We have a ban that allows every teacher or any other instructional person to give permission to use that phone on a one-to-one basis. I love that part. We also, at our superintendent's recommendation, said it isn't a ban, you can't have it, you got to go put it in a box or in a little thing hanging on the back of the shelf. You can keep it with you and in airplane mode. And that's kind of a way to make sure that in some security situations they can reach out. But we've talked about this policy in terms of our 3 strategic goals. Are we going to become even better than an A-rated district? Are we going to always, always, always put safety and security of our students first and foremost in what we do and how we spend our money and how we set policies? And then the third is we have a national crisis in mental health, particularly among young women. And I will not stop talking about this because the third one, over the past 10 years, has had, I like the survey, but the survey captures 5% or so of the 820,000 people that are directly affected and contributing to public schools. I even like more the hard data that we have. And Chair, emergency room admissions for teenage girls who hurt themselves. That's hard data. In the last 10 years, it's up 400%. So 3 categories, academics, security, and mental health. I was very fortunate this week to attend with Mary Fertig and Aaron and a few other people, the Parent Community Involvement Task Force. Unbelievable discussion, and the discussion centered largely around how is it going to affect academics, mental health, and security. A captain from the Plantation Police Force came. And he said, in very clear terms, there are many times you do not want to have your cell phone out when it really hits the fan. You need to listen to the teacher or whoever's guiding you to do the right thing. In many cases, the right thing is not to use your phone. As Ms. Leonardi pointed out, there are specific instances where you don't. And I will add to her point by saying you can't get 100 people in a fight at Fort Lauderdale High School without cell phones. Chair, did we have a fight with 100 kids at Fort Lauderdale High School last year?
Dr. Hepburn.
I don't know about that. Ms. Washington?
There was not 100 involved.
Okay, well, I'm a little bit of hyperbole, but it was more than 2. And without cell phones, sometimes youngsters will choose to do things which is not wise. You can't get 12 kids beating up a kid at Coral Springs after MSD, and you can't get many people, I don't know if it's 100, but that's what the Sun Sentinel says, fighting without technology like that, and we have to be careful. I also want to point out something else that I was reminded of by looking at previous school board records. We are suing social media companies. Broward County Schools is suing Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and the rest. And if you read the suit that we have joined, it is disgusting. Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook divides his revenue sources by Facebook high schools and non-Facebook high schools. And Trey will point out to us that we're a non-Facebook high school because it's not easy to get to Facebook in our schools. But there are workarounds to that, and there is certainly after hours. But to Mark Zuckerberg's, our kids are just a revenue source. And that is the opposite of why we have a school system in Broward County. We are here to educate our kids. I'm going to take a little bit longer, Chan. I'm sorry, but this is I think, worth it. And I'll come back in round two with some of my other points. But I learned a lot from the Parent Community Task Force. I think it was a really a wonderful thing to do. I encourage us over and over again to engage the community as much as possible. The bottom line is that change is not hard. As much as people want to say change is hard, making that change, making that decision that we made in July to go bell to bell with a specific policy for cell phone use was not hard. Implementing that change is hard. And we are implementing today. We had a 2-week waiver period where we did not have any punishments for people. We've had a maybe slower than some people would like adoption of the enforcement rules. But implementing change is hard. And what I hear in this survey is we're not implementing it perfectly, and I didn't expect us to implement it perfectly. But I don't have the data in Broward County yet to say that change is required. What I have is a bunch of very useful data about some staff, from parents, from students, about ways in which we might make it better someday. But I believe in following the data. I believe this was a wise policy to try for this year. I'm dying to see the data plan. I will advocate at the end of second round of comments that we have a workshop item at the next workshop to see the data collection plan for this policy. I want the community to know what data we're going to be gathering. And I hope it's things like emergency room visits of teenage girls. I hope it's not a survey of students on whether they like this or not. I want it to be about student valid concerns about how we can make it better. I love that. But until we have an intentional data plan that the community and the board can look at and say, look, we know what we're going to test at the end of the year. How is it improving academics? How is it improving mental health? How is it improving safety and security? And have we heard from the experts about that? I'll save the rest of my comments for later. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody online want to go before I get ready for mine in round two? Okay.
Excuse me?
I have you on, I haven't gone yet.
Okay.
You're on round two. And I'm going to, after I go, I'm going to let public comments go, and then we'll go to round two so that we have all the information. I appreciate the survey, and I just, for the public, because they can't see the papers that you gave us, the information was aggregated by grade level because, as was brought up in an email sent to us, middle school is affected differently than elementary and different than high school. So I appreciate the information, and I hope it's going to be available for the public because we just got it. But I do want the public to know we have it. So it was very interesting to see, and I'll say it kind of goes in line with what I've seen as I've gone around to schools. I didn't agree with the lunchtime in the first place. I wasn't here when we made the final vote, so I wasn't able to give my opinion on the lunchtime part of it, but I'm going to do that again today. It is not just that students want to have their phones at lunchtime and that parents would like them to have it. If you look on the staff as it's deaggregated, high school staff also agreed with the fact that the students should have it during, or maybe I'm looking at that wrong. I was looking at that wrong. About lunchtime. So what I've seen when I've gone to the schools, and again, it mainly affects high schools, it is very difficult for the staff to implement it during lunchtime, because if they're walking around and trying to figure out phones, then who's watching all the other parts of what's happening during lunch? So I think when the point today is, do we allow them to use it at lunchtime or not? I think that's the question staff is asking. Do we want to revise the policy and be a little lax on lunchtime? So that when we do round two, I'd like to hear everyone's thought on that. But I would strongly recommend that we do that. I don't believe class change is a good time because they should just be focused on getting on class, but it's their lunchtime. We would never expect adults to go all day long without their cell phones. We would not be able to function. And at lunchtime, it gives them the time to contact their parent to say, you know, we've canceled practice, or hey, there's, you know, this or that for lunchtime. I hope that we would continue to offer those exciting activities that wouldn't make them want to stay on their phone the whole lunch period. But I've heard from a lot of students, and when I ask them if it's being implemented, and honestly, when I ask the principals, they're like, we're not even trying to do it at lunch, we just don't have the capacity. So I don't like to have a policy that's just on paper that we can't do with fidelity, and we can pat ourselves on the back and say whatever we want, but it's not being implemented at lunchtime in high school with the fidelity that we would like to see. And, you know, maybe it's leverage we could use with students. We're going to allow you to use it at lunchtime. If it's a privilege that you're abusing, then we'll go back to you can't have it at lunchtime. But I think it's a way to find a balance for students and for parents, because we do live in a different world with technology. Is just the way we communicate with people. And I think it's important that we take that into consideration. And again, I don't want a policy that we don't follow. I was a teacher in a classroom that said all the time, why do we have this policy? No one's doing it. And which is partly why I became a school board member. So I don't want us to think that we're doing something that's not really happening in the classroom. And I think we should be honest with ourselves. I'm going to stop right now and take public comment, and then we'll go back for round two. And Mrs. Pham, you're first on round two. So public comment. Say that again. Just, yeah.
Is that fine? Can I
yes,
just
that's
read
fine.
her? Okay.
Yes.
So the first is Erin Gohl.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for fitting us in. So thank you so much for holding this workshop to discuss this important topic. I hope that it has become apparent that this policy does need some adaptations. Over the past 2 months, I have had formal, informal, robust, in-passing conversations with a lot of different individuals and groups about this topic. Students and parents have brought up major issues with disparities in implementation, significant impacts to student and family communication, troubling practices for enforcement, and deep and profound concerns that this ban and Broward's approach to it are resulting in antiquated practices and lessons that will leave students wildly unprepared for the world they meet after graduation. And again, to be abundantly clear, I don't think any of us thinks kids should be on their phones during class. I think we all could benefit from being on phones less. We're really talking about giving kids tools during those times when they need it. I have heard references to similar policies in other districts, including Orange. But I just want to really quickly talk about a couple key differences in Broward that are different than Orange and a lot of other places that have done these policies. First of all, we've already had it discussed, but most instructional materials and assignments for high schools are done online. They are digital. And in other districts, we give every kid a device that goes with them to lunch. It goes with them home. In Broward, that doesn't happen. And I'm so excited to hear that we're chipping away at this. I was excited to hear the superintendent say that. But until we do that, this lunchtime period is student cell phones are their only way they can access those materials. At the Parent Community Involvement Task Force, we had a student report that if they want to study for a quiz, they have to print out a PowerPoint of 50 to 60 pages. Most kids don't have printers. The second piece, and I'm going to go quickly here, is we have a giant choice program. Kids don't live near where they go to school. Coordinating those after-school things are really important to families and students, and kids need to be able to do that in the middle of the day. At that meeting, Dr. Zeman, I really appreciate the emphasis on student mental health. We agree, but we cannot conflate social media with access to phones, and they're different. We cannot ignore students who are using their phones productively at lunch or for mental health, positive mental health purposes to take a pause. We had that reported from multiple students at that meeting. And it was kind of described, a student said at that meeting that they used to use like the calendaring function like we all do on their phones, but now they have to use an ineffective paper planner. And their response was, well, if we have to choose outdated methods or, preventing teenage girls from committing suicide, I'll choose the outdated methods, but it's a false dichotomy. We should be doing proactive things for student mental health. And this board has a choice to improve policies that are currently rooted in control and distrust of students and focus on empowering students with agency, voice, and promoting innovative education. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Fertig.
I'm sorry, there is no way I can be that articulate, so, and I'm sorry for being late and missing your presentation, but I did look at it last night online. And so I want to go back to the motion we passed. First, I want to thank Dr. Zeman. He came to our meeting on Monday night, and we had a very lively conversation. It was great. We didn't get to most of our agenda, but we had a wonderful conversation about this. So just a couple things in our motion that I want to take apart. There are three really kind of big parts to this. One is that we are asking you in the future to reconsider the process by which you did this. Okay, I guess one theory is that you do something to someone and then you see what their reaction is and then that's your conversation. But I think a more meaningful conversation is an upfront conversation and a conversation where you do go out to your community and maybe you avoid some of the pitfalls because you've had that conversation. So that was our first kind of point that we brought to you at your last board meeting. So I'm going through these recommendations to align the definition of instructional time and with the states, and we feel like the states is different. I think the real thing, and I walked in, Ms. Hickson, when you were saying something about lunch, so I think that has become the primary point here. One of our task force members said the other night, it's hard to be on your phone too much when you're changing classes because you only have a few minutes, but lunch is a whole different thing. And so we're asking that you align with the state's definition. And I know there's another one here. I just want to say that Dr. Wilson and several members of her department were at our meeting the other night, and because we are talking about a parent university as well as some other initiatives that we're doing, and they were able to talk to us about what they're doing with digital citizenship. And I have to tell you, it was so impressive. We were all just amazed at what they're doing. That is the track you need to be following. You need to be preparing our students for the world they're going to live in and teach them to be responsible, to use their devices responsibly, and what it means when they don't. I know you've had a lot of conversation about that. Just banning something doesn't teach them that. The other thing, and this is a point that Dr. Zeman brought up, and I think it's such an important point about mental health. Mental health cannot be we can't just leave that to 6 hours a day. We can't just leave it to not using your cell phone for 6 hours and maybe we'll solve our mental health problems. We all know it's way beyond that. So one big takeaway from both of these things, well, several. One, different process. Two, we are doing a lot as a district for mental health. We need to do more. And three, I think that we need to really recognize that if we're going to prepare our students for the world that they're going to live in, not the world that we live in or that we wish they lived in, but the world they're actually going to live in, then we need to pursue what Dr. Wilson's department's doing with digital citizenship and make sure that our students are prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other public speakers? Okay, we'll go back for round two. Mrs. Pham?
Landon has had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Landon.
Thank you, Mrs. Pham. Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to talk about this, and I'm choosing today to not even look at my phone, so I do recognize the benefits of it, and I'd also like to recognize the intent that I do recognize that the intent of this policy was to be beneficial for students, and I think we've seen the benefits in class time. Ms. Fertig brought up a point that I was going to make. As some board members say, I think she was reading my notes. I was reading through this lawsuit that was shared. I think I'm using the right language there, lawsuit that was shared with us. And I think it's important that we teach students about the negatives that are outlined here, right? It talks a lot about the negatives of engagement on social media, but we don't inform students of those things. and the alternatives to be able to communicate outside of those platforms. So it's a great point that she brought up about digital citizenship. I also don't want my comments to come across as, oh, he's a student, of course he's opposed to it. Oh, we surveyed students, of course they're opposed to it. Because I believe that is not a fair way of looking at this policy. So Ms. Hickson joined us at our countywide Student Government Association meeting last month, and we had a brief conversation about this, and it highlighted a major issue that many students are feeling with this policy, is that there's a major inequity in how it is being implemented. And students have felt, in my experience, and this goes beyond my school experience, this goes beyond the survey and the many school visits that we conduct, that it feels like this policy was pushed out without, one, hearing from the student perspective, and two, recognizing the impact that phones have positively on the student experience. So before I get to that, I'd like to ask a question to our CIO, and I'm sorry to throw you on the spot if that's okay through the superintendent.
Yes, Mr. Davis.
So in our district, what is the current protections or blocking of social media on district networks?
Dr. Hepburn.
Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And good morning, everyone. So there are certain social media networks that are blocked based on content. And so I can't get into exact details of some of that because some of it traverses into operational security issues. But what I will tell you, there are some known, social media platforms that are not allowed. And so I hesitate to go a little further there.
Right.
But
So thank you for that.
Sure.
And I think it's an important point to bring up because I have been a student here for what feels like a very long time, but I have never been able to get onto a social media app in school. It's impossible on our Wi-Fi. Yes, there's VPNs, there's a way to get around it, but a lot of that does not work anymore. I will give it to the district that I think the district has outsmarted some of our students when it comes to being able to get around those restrictions. So I do want to recognize that there is not widespread social media access in school. The second point that I want to bring up, and it talked about giving teachers the autonomy. And there has been a major concern in my personal school experience, as well as what we've heard at other schools, is that teachers have been told, in some cases, that they are to not use this at all. There should be no technology resources used. And I recognize that the communication from the district has been otherwise. But from what I've heard, there has been some site-based decisions that are to the contrary. So I think it's important that if we do communicate this, it's very clear that there are specific definitions in the policy that outline for what purposes this can be used. And I look forward to the conversation about one-to-one. So talking about lunch in the 1 minute and 22 seconds that I have left is there are many benefits to students to be able to have cell phones at lunchtime. I also recognize the negative side effects. But for many students, lunch is a time to disconnect. Especially at the high school level, it is a non-stop day. And this has been time that students have found to be able to disconnect from that school experience, whether that's listening to music, whether that's doing something on their phone, or whether that's studying. And we've heard in our Speak Up, Speak Out sessions that many students, especially those who are dual enrolled, have seen many negative side effects to their access to technology, as well as their academic performance, because lunchtime used to be that time where students could use those resources to get ahead, communicate with their dual enrollment teachers and those schedules. To the point that a student shared at one of our Speak Up, Speak Out sessions that they are no longer looking to pursue a dual enrollment opportunity because they're concerned that what many students used to be able to have the time to use those resources during lunch are gone now. And I will finish by saying that I think there is a balance with this policy. I don't think you may ask a student, and I'll wrap this up. I think you may ask a student, are you opposed to cell phones at school? And pretty much everybody is going to say, we think we should have our phones. But I think if you look and talk to a lot of students, they have seen the benefits of this policy in class time. I don't really think that there are negatives to this policy in class time. I think there are a lot of benefits there, but I think we need to look at lunchtime and creating essentially a balance during the school day to allow students to have access to technology during lunchtime. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start round two, and I'll just ask my colleagues again, when you finish up your round two comments, if you would just indicate whether you would be okay with changing the lunchtime part or not, so we get a consensus for the workshop today. Mrs. Pham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to say I'm glad that we're here discussing this thoroughly at this workshop. I'm glad that the Parent Advisory Committee had a meeting where they had an in-depth discussion that included parents, because I do agree. I think this policy was really rushed at us, and it wasn't fully developed, and we weren't given the opportunity to fully absorb the consequences. So with that being said, I agree with Mrs. Hickson's statements today. I agree with Landon Spielberg's statements today. I agree with Mary Fertig and the other speaker from the Parent Advisory Committee, and think that we really feel that we need to rethink this. And if possible, even, I'd like to know whether or not a hybrid policy was even considered or tossed out. We don't have any data on that. It's just you can't use your cell phone, period, at phone. I mean, you can't use your cell phone at lunch. And I agree that lunch is a relaxed time, it's a social time, and a distressor time. And how it's been interpreted is if you're using the phone, that's going to harm you mentally, when in fact it could be helping a student get ahead because they're studying or they're brainstorming with someone a few tables away, saying, hey, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to this question. I'm afraid it might be on the test. Do you know, what's your thoughts? That kind of thing. So I think we have to look at the negatives and the positives. If there's even a way to create an area where people that want to use their cell phones in order to study or to collaborate with others on school tests or projects coming up, I think that should be allowed. And if you want to limit that time to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, set an area aside where certain people sit at these tables that are going to be using their phones, you know that, but they're limited to 10 minutes during that lunch period, then that would be it. After 10 minutes, they have to go back and sit in the other area, or even a standing area. But I do think there has to be some compromises that are made. I can't imagine teachers not being able to use cell phones during their lunch period, and I don't think we should set that double standard. And I don't think it's a realistic standard, because in real life, you're not going to have a superior telling you, you can't do this, and you have to sit there and watch them while they do it in front of you. I mean, that's just really hypocritical. So, and I think we should think of the social benefits that students get when they're not using their cell phones. But again, we need to mesh that with the benefits they get from being able to use their cell phones. And it's really a personal choice, and it might even be a parental choice. We can't always be the parents in the room. So I'd like to see some data on that, again, where if we did some kind of hybrid during the lunch period. I'm complete agreement that we don't need cell phone usage during times of instruction unless that's at the teacher's request. In addition, I want to go back to the part that we were talking about, filming incidents that are going on, and one of this would have even been when the students had a disruptive meeting. I'm not going to say fighting, I'm going to say meeting about cell phone usage. And I want to say there's not always video cameras around. Specifically, we have a lot of incidents that happen in bathrooms. We don't have video cameras in bathrooms. And because it's outside the camera area, I think it's very, very important that things get documented. And at this point, it seems like everything is being assumed that it's for the negative with being videotaped. It's for the purposes for social media or for bullying. And that's not true. I think we have to weigh this. And I'm going to give you 2 examples that immediately came to my mind. One of the students was being beat up in a bathroom by several girls. And her friend couldn't get involved, couldn't get out because they were blocked. The doorway was blocked, but she had the common sense to videotape. And finally, when this girl broke free that was getting beat up, the only way she could get out of that bathroom was to swing and hit these other girls and run. And run. So therefore, her hitting them was exculpatory. She had no choice but to defend, to remove herself from an area where she was being harmed. So in that case, that video was very valuable. Another case, there was a girl that was alleged that she impacted with an SIU investigator in the area of this groin. There was no cameras on that platform when that happened. She was charged criminally. She had to fight the criminal charges. A video surfaced showing that she never made impact with that man. She never touched him. He never groped his groin area. He never put his hands across his waist, went down, or anything. That video was exculpatory. But for that, that girl may have had criminal charges for the rest of her life. So I say I am definitely in favor of, if the motivation is good, that there should be some kind of exception. And I'm going to just ask Jody right now, whether or not, is there any exception where a student is allowed to take videos and they come forth with them, they show them to their parents and say, look what happened, or they bring them forward to the administration where they said, thank you very much, because it's no longer he said, she said, you're watching in real time what happened.
Dr. Hepburn.
I'll answer that question, Dr. Washington. As I said before, it's a thin line. Of course, if a student is in harm's way, or if a friend is with a student they're in harm's way and they're using a cell phone to document something to make sure appropriate consequences or to get the right help, absolutely. We'll collect that information and do what we need to do to address that situation or administer the right consequences. But we always err on the side of caution with that, and not saying, hey, openly, hey, take your cell phones. If something happens, record it, because as a past administrator, and many of these staff members are past administrators, who would tell you over and over again that there may be a small percentage of good in those in those events, but oftentimes folks are just pulling out cell phones to record something to go post it and do something nefarious with it. But absolutely, if something bad is going on and we have video evidence from a student, we utilize that evidence accordingly.
Thank you, Dr. Hepburn, and I appreciate that we are going to look at the motivation behind it, because it's not the taking of the video, it's what they do with it afterwards. It's really the question. So the harm is not in taking it, it's what results from that. Is there any language, or can you point to any language where it says that in this policy? Because I'm not aware of that.
Dr. Hepburn.
I'll ask Dr. Washington if there's any language in the policy.
So the language in the policy, if you go to slide 4, that is the language around the wireless communication devices, and in bullet number 4, it does talk about the rule violation occurring. However, if they use their video to properly report an incident that compromises the safety, well-being of staff, they wouldn't be subjected to additional consequences for inciting a disturbance, major disruption on campus, things like that.
So thank you. I'm just glad that you clarified. It's okay to take the video, it's what you do with it afterwards. Thank you.
So I just want to make sure that it's clear that it is a cell phone violation. According to the current policy, it's a cell phone violation. They're not subject to additional disciplinary action if it results in, for example, there have been incidents where there's video or things posted on social media, and it results in a lockdown of a campus the next day while an investigation takes place to see, there's rumor there's going to be a large fight, whatever word you want to use to call it, and they go on a secure or a lockdown to investigate the credibility of that. And if that student takes a video of it, shares in that way, they won't be subject to a consequence of a major disruption on campus. But if they are filming a fight and they share that fight on social media and it results in another fight, or it is used in a bullying investigation, they are subject to the rules that are associated with that. depending on, again, how it's used, but using their phone during school hours for whatever reason, under the current rule, does violate the cell phone rule.
Thank you for clarifying that. Then I do think there should be an exception. I do. And we're not talking about, again, posting it on social media. What we're talking about, documenting something that's a policy breaking of a policy, can be a teacher or a student, and or a crime, in effect, and using that evidence to either show proof of guilt or innocence. So I think there definitely should be exception for that. And then for that reason, I would not be voting for this policy until that change would be documented in there. Thank you.
Well, Mrs. Pham, so the policy already is in place. We're just discussing today being able to change it. So the question, are you still a yes for changing the policy about using it at lunchtime?
I would, no, not until this was incorporated, because I think too many things happen. And I think it's horrible that parents have to defend, get an attorney, or someone gets a charge for a cell phone violation when they're doing it to protect themselves. I can't go along with that. I won't agree to that. Thank you.
Chair, before you go to the next, could I just suggest also that we ask about whether or not board members think that bringing the data collection plan to the next workshop would make sense?
Okay. Sure. Let me add that to the list here. Data collection. Okay. So, Mrs. Pham, are you a yes or a no on bringing a data collection plan to the next board workshop?
No, I'm not against that.
Okay. So you're a yes. Mrs. Leonardi.
Thank you. First, I wanted to ask, this lawsuit was shared with us. I don't know that it's been shared with members of the audience or if it will be shared online, but could someone provide some context for why this lawsuit was shared with us?
Dr. Hepburn.
Go ahead, Ms. Stark Adams.
Through the chair, just in case that the results of the motion to dismiss had any impact on your comments with regards to cell phone usage.
Okay, so I will echo my frustration with getting information the day of. If this, obviously it pertains to this workshop, it's useful information. It should be available to the public. I'm very frustrated with getting information on the day of as opposed to it being a part of the packet.
And please excuse me, Ms. Leonardi, I had just received this order from the court, and so I wanted to provide that to you rather than not provide it to you.
Okay.
So I
seems
literally
like
just
there's a lot of
received it minutes before.
Okay. A lot of last-minute stuff happening today, I guess. I had the opportunity to speak with student leaders at Fort Lauderdale High School. And first, I want to acknowledge the public speakers and our student advisors who shared some really important guidance. Well, let me back up. I understand the frustration around implementation and the way the board went about collecting community feedback, and I think those concerns are valid. And I also don't think we should let the perfect get in the way of the good. And I think that we are trying to address such a big and wide-ranging problem, and I think it's something that we have a responsibility to solve, and I think in the process of doing that, it's going to be messy and it's not going to be perfect. So, it pains me to disagree with, again, some people that I really respect and I think are the concerns that have been raised are valid, but I'm coming from a place of not of control or trying to go back to outdated methods. But really, I'm coming from a place of data and what that data suggests is best for students. So I'll get to the question, Ms. Hickson. I do support continuing with the lunchtime restriction, and there are a variety of reasons why. And then I also want to speak to how we can improve the implementation and improve our community's involvement in how we move forward. So the reason I support continuing with the restriction during lunch is that what I heard, and again, I think maybe some of the issue is that we're talking a lot in anecdotes and not in data today. We do have some, but we're all coming to this with different stories of what we've seen at schools, and that is frustrating to me. But I have a solution for that down the line. But in my experience at Fort Lauderdale High School, the superintendent and I got to visit. The students said because they are not allowed to use their cell phones during lunch and during hall passing, they forget about their phones. Data also suggests that being able to refocus from using your phone takes about 20 minutes. So I think that if we allow the cell phone use during lunch, it kind of negates the impact of having the restriction in the first place. Again, that's anecdotal. So I understand, again, the frustration around the restriction. I get that. The other piece of this, and I think Dr. Zeman spoke to this, cell phones are designed to be addictive. And we have conversations about, we want to make sure that students are engaging in fun activities during lunch, and I have some questions about that. But when they have something that is designed by lots of very smart people to be addictive, when they have a choice between that and engaging in different school activities, the odds are against engaging in those activities. So I would like to see a few things. I support the data collection plan. As a part of that plan, I would like to see input from law enforcement. I would like to see input data on academics in fights. I would also like to see teachers and principals at the table to talk about the implementation, because again, anecdotal evidence is useful to some extent, but it's not complete. And I think that, and I've suggested this from the very beginning, I would really like us to see, really like to see us form some sort of work group with parents, with staff, with students, to guide where we go with this. Landon suggested about educating students about the harms of social media and addiction to our devices, I think is very, very important. Ms. Gohl has raised some very serious concerns from parents for months now, and I think that information is useful. So, again, I would like to see us do a work group. I support the restriction during lunch. I think it's too early to make a decision about this school year to go back on the policy. And to one last piece, I would like to know what direction has been given to staff about monitoring cell phone use during lunch, because again, we're hearing a lot of stories. I'm not hearing, anything from staff about this. And I would also like to know what initiatives have we engaged in to help with the implementation during lunch. And I would also like to know so Landon mentioned, some site-based decisions that are being made to teachers. So I would also like to understand that piece, because I know that the district has put out information. Why are we having different site-based decisions? Why are people making decisions based on policy at different sites when the board and the district have made these decisions? So I know that's a lot I just asked. Yeah.
Dr. Hepburn, do you have any questions for?
No, I'm just writing down all the things Ms. Leonardi mentioned. We can bring a lot of that stuff back in follow-up, and then start crafting some of the other work groups that you discussed too. So we'll be ready that's the consensus about bringing I forgot what Dr. Zeman coined the term. It was a data plan. He said data plan. We'll bring that back at the next workshop. Or I'll do you better. We'll send that to you before the next workshop to the board.
Okay. So Ms. Leonardi, are you a yes on the data collection plan? Dr. Holness?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, my concern here is lack of substantive data to suggest that restricting cell phone use during lunchtime improve students' mental well-being or their learning outcome, and so on and so forth. we do not have that data, we do not have that information, and so we could ask the question two ways. If we restrict cell phones during lunchtime, is it beneficial to students? As well as, is it not beneficial to students? Could it actually, restricting it during lunchtime, could it actually result in what we're trying to avoid in the first place? And so, you know, functionality, even with children, is highly dependent on use of technology to some degree. We have evolved in a society that is collectively technology dependent. And I would assert that 100% restriction of the use of cell phones could actually be counterproductive to our students. We've heard from parents by the survey that we looked at, and from students, and our student advisor, London, here today also eloquently expressed the concerns that exist. And I think when we look at the data, we have majority of students, obviously, that believes restriction during lunchtime is counterproductive. And we also have over 50% of parents, it appears, based on the disaggregated data, that actually feels the same. So if we don't have any sort of research or substantive information to look at to determine that restriction during lunchtime is beneficial, why are we doing it? And so it is concerning, and Board Member Hicks and I am on the side of, based upon the information that we currently have, that we should not restrict it during lunchtime. But at the same time, I would like for the superintendent to direct his staff to provide additional data points and research that would support our position today as well, if we should decide on not restricting cell phones during lunchtime. It was mentioned here that the district staff may be taken away from essential work that they have to do in running a cafeteria during lunchtime. In fact, I remember when I had to do that when I was in the LEAD program, and it is a lot of work to supervise 400, 500, 800 kids in a lunchroom, and then at the same time you have this added factor that we don't know if it's beneficial. And I'm also in agreement with Board Member Zeman's data, suggestion as well. The other point that I'd like to make before I end is that it's regarding during students using cell phones during study hall or during any other class period where they don't have access to a computer, because our goal, Dr. Hepburn, as you mentioned, is to make sure every student has access to a computer. As a board member, my understanding is that we're not 100% there. So if a study hall period does not provide a student a computer to every student, then those students should be allowed to use their cell phone for instructional purposes until a computer is provided. In addition to that, if a classroom is requiring that an assignment be completed on a computer, and there's not enough computers in that classroom to where some of those students do not have access, or they have to share that sort of interfere with their ability to effectively complete the assignment, then there should be some latitude given to those students to use their cell phones for instructional purposes until a computer is provided to every child. So if we're not there 100%, then we should have some sort of latitude given, and this awareness is brought to our school staff that they should be accommodating in this regards rather than be completely restrictive, because they may have their own classroom rules as far as cell phone use and trying to abide by the policy. So those are my concerns, Dr. Hepburn, and if you could proceed in ensuring that students have full access, even if there's not a computer available, to technology to get their work done.
Dr. Hepburn.
Yes, we'll have the team work on that and continue to provide guidance to teachers. So just to remember that this is legislation and teachers have autonomy with that legislation. As a deemed fit based on the circumstance in the classroom. But we'll continue to provide guidance and also work with schools, because now we do have detailed inventory for most of our schools now about how many laptops they have on their campus that they may not be aware of, so we can make sure they're distributed appropriately.
Right, and I just want to reiterate really quick and then I'm finished. So actually my real major concern, because I've heard it multiple times, is our study hall students. If there's not enough computer in there, no study hall teacher or instructional staff should limit a student from using a cell phone to complete their instructional task given, because that's the purpose of the study hall. Yep. And if we don't have the technology available to give to everyone, we cannot have a study hall teacher having a classroom guideline that no cell phones are allowed if we're not providing access to what they need. Because some study halls may have 50, 60 students in there, and there's only 30 computers. So I'm just concerned that a staff have a guideline that they're following class specific, and then not providing the required tools for the students who are there to complete their assignments. So I believe if there's not enough computers in a study hall class, those students without a computer should be afforded the opportunity to use their cell phones to get their work done.
Noted.
Thank you. And I'll go because Dr. Zeman wanted to go last, and I'll ask her again online. So I'll just be quick. I believe that we should adjust our policy to allow for students to use it at lunchtime. I agree with Mrs. Pham. It's hypocritical for us to allow teacher to use it at lunchtime. Security can use it, and I know staff is different than students, but we're not teaching, we're not modeling what we're asking for. So I would like to ask us to look at the policy and allow the students to use just at lunch, not at class time. Mr. Alston, do you want to weigh in on, oh, and I'm a yes for data collection. Mr. Alston, can you weigh in on use for lunchtime and data collection? Okay, Mr. Fogenholy?
Yes, Chair, I'm open. Of course, if I want to come back to a board workshop, did want to add really quick. I had the opportunity to walk Palm Beach schools earlier this week, and when I got to visit the high school there at John Leonard, you're talking about thousands of kids. I had the opportunity to see at lunchtime and the lunch break, and to see most of the kids. I didn't see a cell phone the entire time, and to see how kids were together and kids were in groups, socializing, talking. It was really refreshing to see and really awesome to see, and comparing it to our lunch breaks, when now, even though we have this policy in place, you see a lot of our kids with their head down by themselves on their cell phones, and I think it makes a big difference. So Superintendent, I think it would be helpful if you could chime in, at least in Palm Beach, what they were doing there and how that implementation happened. And also, even in the middle school level, I know that they have the lock bags, and seeing how the amount of D's and F's that they had in those schools dropped drastically once they took cell phones away. Those are things that we should be thinking about, and the type of data that I would want to see in a future workshop, but of course that's for the next board, so I wanted to put that in there.
Dr. Hepburn.
Yes, as I said before, all of these things happen over time. It did not happen in 3 months, 6 months. Palm Beach County and their cell phone rules are a little bit different than ours, but you have some schools that have implemented things over time, over multiple years, and you see it in culture now. As I said before, many of our students have had cell phones since birth, since they were toddlers. And the expectations that we're going to just have a hard stop is not reality. It takes time. And so that's what you saw at John I. Leonard. That is the largest high school in Palm Beach in Palm Beach County, and it took a lot of time for them to get to that point. Same with some of the middle schools. It took a lot of time. They established culture. They kept repeating it. They implementing it in a way that's not affecting students negatively and emotionally, because we know some of our kids are very emotional, attached to their devices. And over time, you see the fruits of some of that labor. Same with Orange County. It literally took them over a year to get where they are with their cell phone implementation too. So it's a difficult situation for students. It's a difficult task for administrators too, to continue to chop at that tree day after day, but it takes time to get there.
Thank you. Mrs. Rupert?
I'm here. I am kind of bringing it to a workshop.
So here's the two questions. You set lunchtime to adjust the policy to allow cell phone use at lunchtime, and data collection, to bring back a data collection plan. Those are the two questions.
Yes, lunch, and the day, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Alston? Keep trying. Okay. Before I turn it over to Dr. Zeman for the last one, I would just say I would hope that if we allowed students the opportunity to use their cell phone, but provided different things at lunchtime, they would make the choice not to use their cell phones as opposed to us guiding it. If there are good enough activity, listen, I mean, if there's something that's going on and it's engaging to them, they would. Maybe they use their phone as Mrs. Pham said, although I wouldn't want to put that in policy because implementing that would be a nightmare. But, the first couple of minutes to say whatever they need to say to their parents and then run and go and do the activity that's being provided, I just think I still am, and we're kind of split here about it. So I just think the compromise is necessary. All right, Dr. Zeman.
Thank you very much. And I want to start by saying that I am very open to making this policy better. I'm really concerned, though, about the credibility of this board. The timing of this change suggests around January or February we might change the policy that we just started this year, which means we're going to go out to the community that we shook, rattled, and rolled and said, we're going to do something different. We're going to put academics, mental health, safety and security, our 3 pillars of our strategic plan, we're going to set them aside, and we're going to not do an implementation and fix enforcement and get to the one-on-one laptop policy, all part of a culture change, as our superintendent is talking about. And we're going to fail to have any conviction about our own votes on something, and we're going to flip-flop on something as dramatic as lunchtime. You want some data? Let me give you some data. Ms. Leonardi gave you some factual data. It takes 20 minutes to get off a cell phone and readjust your focus on something else. So do you want to be the teacher after lunch hour and spend 20 minutes trying to get your attention? Or do you want to be the teacher that told me that for the first time in 10 years with 26 students, she saw 52 eyeballs during a lecture? For the first time in 10 years, she saw every student listening to her because there were no cell phones in their pockets or on their desks. You want some more data? Here you go, Dr. Holness. You ready? 25,600 of our parents said that our students' learning experiences has either not changed or gotten better. And 5,000 said it got worse. So are we going to jump up and down through hoops for 5,000 or the 25,000 that said this is either better or cause no harm? Like, we can only have one policy, and we got to be careful about a vocal minority. And I want to bring out some more data. You want hard data? 2,900 of our staff said that they did not want cell phones to be open during lunchtime, and 2,000 said they were open, they disagreed with taking it away. So 60% of our staff also want it taken away from lunch. That's data. That's not conjecture. We don't know the outcome in Broward County, but the timing of a change is really important, and the credibility of this board is at stake because we decided to do it. Another real big point. Broward County, I think, has choice in where kids go to school. Is that correct, Chair?
Dr. Hepburn.
Yes, that's correct.
Terrific. Westminster Academy, cell phone ban. Franklin Academy, bell-to-bell restriction. Pinecrest, cell phone ban. Renaissance Charter, cell phone ban. Somerset Academy, cell phone ban. Avant-Garde Academy, cell phone ban. Coral Springs Charter School, cell phone ban. North Broward Prep, cell phone ban. What do they know that we don't know? And are they willing to flip-flop in the middle of a school year and not just implement and get it better over the course of 10 months, but halfway through just trying to get it right to change so dramatically a policy and do it. By the way, these schools over the last 5 years have all gone toward more restrictive policies. They tried it, they gathered data, and they didn't go backwards, they went forward. So I'm very surprised that we're here. I have a middle school daughter. At her high school, it's 100% enforced. Excuse me, at her middle school, 100% enforced. You go to lunch, there is not a cell phone in the cafeteria, which is massive, by the way. We've learned from the community that this policy is not 100% enforced. Dr. Hepburn, if you had to choose between 100% enforcement of this, so we actually try the policy that this board and this staff has advocated, if you had a choice between 100% enforcement as soon as possible or changing the policy mid-year, which would you choose?
Dr. Hepburn.
Enforcement.
And what is your plan for enforcement going forward, Dr. Hepburn?
It's obvious that everybody knows the policy now as we reflect on the data, and so we're continuously working with our principals, work with our teachers and other stakeholders in the schools to start really enforcing this, but ensuring that we're not punishing kids to the point of being home for a cell phone. So we'll get there.
And Dr. Hepburn, what policy do you support about cell phone use in Broward County schools for the balance of this year?
I support the stance the board took this summer.
Terrific. And just to be clear, we have a policy with massive exceptions. We have 14,000 employees that can give kids the right to use their cell phone. We are complying with state law, but state law is a minimum standard. It does not tell 67 districts what to do. It just says you've got to do these things, right? We have lots of exceptions. We give lots of permissions. We even have airplane mode for people to get it. At best, we can change a policy that we haven't fully implemented, or we can make sure the implementation, including enforcement, is done even better. We can take the gradual steps this year to try and see how well we can do this in terms of implementing. And again, implementing is hard, change is not. And then, based on next workshop, we can see what the data plan looks like. And we can learn more about this in Broward County. But there is substantial data from the survey, from research, from Jonathan Haidt's books, from all kinds of studies that cell phones don't just correlate with mental health problems, they cause mental health problems. And the addiction that's created not just through social media, but through games that these kids play is very real, and we have to stand in alignment with our lawsuit against these firms saying that what they're doing has caused us harm. I went to Dallas last week to the Council of Great City Schools. Broward County is the envy of the other 78 districts. I had dozens of school board members and dozens of superintendents say, we love what you did about cell phones. I can't wait to do it in Dallas, in Denver. I'm sure that he doesn't mind this. Superintendent Carvalho is implementing this exact same policy mid-year in LA because of what Broward did here, and he's so hopeful about the positive benefits that come with that. We have choices in Broward schools. The private schools and the charters that I read to you have already gotten a jump in front of us. I don't think Broward County, given the survey responses and the evidence that we have, would suggest such a dramatic and draconian change as doing something like this mid-year. Again, it's in policy, so changing policy takes a significant amount of time. We're voting today whether we want to bring it back to a workshop. I don't want to confuse the community and think that I would be willing to change this year. I'm not. I want to try it for the year. The superintendent wants to try it for a year. I want to be serious about gathering data, though, so that when we come back here and discuss this, we're not talking about a study done in Denver. We're talking about what was the outcome-based data here. Superintendent, I'm very glad about the movement toward enforcement. I'm overwhelmed with the one-to-one laptop policy. We found some things as a result of this policy that we need to change right away. And I'm just overwhelmingly impressed with the senior staff and the superintendent's response to these things. See a problem, fix it. So I appreciate the time on this, but again, I'm happy to change this long term. I want to try it this year. I want to measure. I want to make sure what we're doing really works. And if it helps academics, as the students and teachers and staff told us it should or would, if it improves mental health in any kind of tangible way, and if we improve security by keeping people's focus. We tell kids all the time to see something, say something, right? How much can you see when you're doing this?
With the QR code.
Okay, when you had your turn, guys, come on, let's play by the rules. QR code's a legitimate issue. We didn't talk about it. I get it. But the bigger issue, I really believe, is if your head's down, you're not going to see something fall out of a kid's backpack. You're not going to see somebody acting in a way that's different that should prompt you to say, look, we got to figure out what's going on over there. If we believe in see something, say something, we got to give the kids a chance to see something, which is what we did this summer. And I want to stand by that conviction. I want to try it all year, and then we can come back based on real outcome data and decide, are there ways to change this? So as Dr. Hepburn points out, we go through this change with a periodicity that makes sense. And in this case, it's such a big policy, I think we have to wait out the year and see what that data is and make things better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Landon, we'll finish up with you.
Yep. Thank you. And seeing, I'd like to first start by saying that many other schools in our district that are not Broward County Public Schools have adopted cell phone bans with exceptions of lunch. So I just like that to be put out there. I appreciate the conversation that we had today. I think it's important. We talked a lot, and I incredibly respect Dr. Hepburn's comments, and I appreciate them about the time it takes to implement a policy like this. And I don't want it to be lost that our staff have done a lot of work. Don't even get me started on how amazing Dr. Washington is, because we'll be here all day, but we do have amazing staff that have implemented this policy, so I appreciate it. But I'd like to say that the comment was made about taking a lot of time to implement this policy, and I'd just like to say that I don't agree with the fact that as time goes on, the policy is just magically going to start working. So I think we need to do something, and I accept the challenge to work with our countywide student government organization to find initiatives that we can do to re-engage our students. Because it felt like we gave this policy and we said, we're not going to have cell phones, and then we only gave that policy and we didn't really do anything to re-engage students beyond saying, you don't have a cell phone anymore. So I think there's an additional layer of support that could be done to be able to help our students engage, because I think if we provide those opportunities, students will take them. Rather than just saying, here's a policy change, we hope you come along with it. So I appreciate the conversation, and I look forward to being able to find a good way to implement this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Landon. I'll just jump on that, and then Dr. Holness would like to add a brief part to it, and then we're going to take a little break so we can all get ready for lunch. So I've been to a number of schools and always been interested. They have a ping pong table at lunch. They have spoken word at lunch. So that was the point I was trying to make. There are activities now in some of the schools that students engage them where they're not trying to pull out their phone and they can either watch it or they're participating in it. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and would say to the superintendent, look at some of those schools and what the principals and staff have already put into. They kind of have a schedule. On Mondays they do this, on Tuesdays they do that, and they give the students kind of the opportunity. Chess, we've talked about chess, right? Having chess available so that the students could work on it. So I would just add that on to what Landon said. Dr. Holness?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd just like to mention that the changes to this policy, well, I'll just ask a question. Dr. Hepburn, changes made to this policy, we as a board can decide that the implementation will be 2025-2026 school year?
Dr. Hepburn.
Ms. Washington? The suggestion, if they make suggestions now, is that applicable? Can it be applicable to 25-26?
So I'm looking at my legal counterpart over here that helps me with this code of conduct.
Ms. Presta?
I think you would have to engage in the rulemaking process.
Okay, so I just also want to mention that excessive use of cell phone, and I concur, Dr. Zeman, that there are many studies that suggest that excessive use of cell phones can result in several negative impact on students and their learning and their mental health and so on. But excessive use of cell phone is different than no use of cell phone, and we cannot confuse the two. No use of cell phone, which there are not adequate studies available, it appears, in determining the impact on students' well-being and learning outcome with absolutely no use. So I am not against excessive use of cell phones, and I don't think anyone here is. The question that is in play is use of cell phones during lunchtime. I would also mention that changes to new policies, in my opinion, will evolve into great policies. But if we're reluctant to change policies, then we're accepting possibly mediocre policies. So there should not be, in my opinion, reluctance to look at change. I think as policies evolve, they become better. And so that is what we're trying to do. Now, the data that's presented before us suggests, and I would concur again, Dr. Zeman, that the staff supports restricting cell phones during lunch hour. However, the data that's presented to us today also suggests that majority of parents and students do not support restricting cell phones during lunch hour. So I'm looking at what's factually here, what's presented to me. And so I did make a comment that we get more data than what we have done in our survey, because I think substantive data will allow us to make better and informed decision. So there is no data that suggests restricting cell phones or substantive relevant data that would suggest restricting cell phones during lunch hour is beneficial or not. We don't have it. But what I do have is our survey from our parents in this district in Broward County that says that we would prefer that it's not restricted during lunch hour. We also have it from the student's perspective. Now, I'll just make a concluding comment. I am totally in agreement that excessive use of cell phones, supported by studies, Dr. Zeman, as you mentioned, is counterproductive to students' well-being. But no use of cell phones, there's no studies that would suggest that that is beneficial, and we have data to suggest that parents would prefer their children to have access. We've had many positive benefits suggested by London and some of the board members to having cell phone use during the lunch hour. So I just want to clarify the difference, because this board member supports not using cell phones excessively during instructional time and all of that. The question in play is, should they use it or not during lunch hour, and what's the impact of that? Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Hepburn, the takeaway, I think, is that everyone agrees that we should have a data collection plan that's shared with us, whether it's through a workshop or that you're sending it to us. And there are 3 board members who said yes to changing the policy for lunch, and 4 that said no. So you take that as you wish, with 2 board members not weighing in on that. And that, I think, concludes this part of the workshop for today. So thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. Thank you and welcome back. The next item is corrective action policy and procedures. I will now turn it over to staff for a brief presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Hickson. I'll turn it over to Mr. Azarito and Mr. Lozano.
Good afternoon, school board members. My name is David Azarito, Chief People Officer. With me is Ernie Lozano. He's currently the task assigned Chief of Safety and Security, as well as the Executive Director over Professional Standards and Labor Relations. So we're going to talk a little bit about corrective actions today, talk about Policy 4.9 and the procedures that we currently have in place to work with our employees. So as soon as they grab that up there. Their purpose today is to present this information to the board, to the community, to the employees, to let them know information regarding Policy 4.9 and our procedures that are currently in place. On 4.9, I handed out a copy of it, so you all have a copy of 4.9 in front of you. It's been placed online as well, attached to the agenda item. So just without reading through the entire policy, just a couple of highlights. The policy was last revised in 2018. I believe it's currently in the queue to be revised. There's been some department name changes since then, as well as titles, such as my title, have been changed. So we're looking at revamping that up a little bit. So it's a good time to look at it and to get feedback on any revisions that may need to be put in place. But Policy 4.9, it's designed to change employees' job performance, conduct, and attendance, designed to improve those behaviors. It is also the intent of the board that once we're implementing corrective action, we're being fair and equitable to all of our employees while holding them accountable to their job responsibilities. And it's also worth noting that if there is conflict language within 4.9 and one of our collective bargaining agreements, the collective bargaining agreement does prevail. That's important to know. It hasn't come up much since I've been here, but it is a possibility. So in Policy 4.9, a couple of sections that we're going to highlight on page 2 and 3. List our categories of offenses and outcomes. So category A, the first one, you can read through those. The outcome would be dismissal. Category B, we're going to spend some more time on today. What this section does is it gives the Professional Standards Committee, which we'll talk about later, this is their matrix. These are their guidelines that they use when they're going to recommend a penalty for one of the offenses that an employee may do. The policy is also contains circumstances that this committee considers when they're determining that appropriate penalty within the range. So you'll see in the policy the range is pretty, if you can see that, hopefully you can see it online as well. So Policy 4.9, the outcome for an item in Section B, the first one, for instance, committing a criminal act related to performance of duties or continued fitness for office. If it's a felony, the range in the policy just says suspension to dismissal. But how long is that suspension is what we started looking at. So we added some suggested outcomes. These are not in policy, these are just suggestions here. So for instance, for that first one of being a felony, it could be a 10-day suspension to dismissal. Later on, letter D, for instance, driving under the influence within the scope of employment, had just suspension to dismissal. Our suggested outcome could be a 10-day suspension to dismissal. And so on the next 2 pages, you'll see there's 18 total offenses in Category B that have a broad range of outcomes that we've kind of suggested a little narrower scope. And we're curious to hear your feedback on that. The suggested outcomes are based on prior cases that we've done in professional standards, SIU, and employee relations. So we've taken all of those consequences, all the things that have been given out to employees, and kind of helped us to mold this suggested outcome. And that is page 5 and 6. And so we're curious to hear your feedback on that later. However, I want to switch over to Mr. Lozano. He's going to talk about the current makeup of the Professional Standards Department.
Good morning, Ernie Lozano, Executive Director, Professional Standards, Labor Relations. Chief Azarito, I feel like we got warped into, I'm going to go back to my teenage years, a Schoolhouse Rock video, right? I'm sure we remember Conjunction Junction, what's your function? So instead of how a bill becomes a law, we're going to look at today how a discipline item ends up on a school board agenda. So I'm excited to take you through the process of how a recommendation for discipline ends up on the school board agenda. So this board did work. We restructured last year, and we put all investigations into one department, the Professional Standards Department. So we just wanted to remind the board of that structure, of who at the district level participates in investigations. So under me sits the Director of Professional Standards. Under the Director of Professional Standards, we have the Manager of Professional Standards, and the Sergeant. One of our sergeants, Jeff Levine, serves as our sergeant who handles the investigative side of investigations. And then under both of them, we have 3 HR specialists, and we have 6 investigators from Broward Schools Police. So how do we utilize this phenomenal team of individuals? On page 8 of the PowerPoint, you can see the roles the employee plays throughout the process, the role the site-based administrator plays throughout the process, and the role the professional standards team plays throughout the process. So slide 8 really focuses on when it's a site-based action, and sometimes we think of site-based as school-based. But remember, we do a lot of consequencing of employees in transportation, safety and security, so it's not just school-based discipline, it's site-based. So if you turn to page 9, this shows you the flow chart that I'm going to take you through on how a recommendation for discipline ends up on a board agenda. So everything starts now through a case intake. There's an alleged allegation of misconduct on an employee. Every allegation of misconduct now comes to the Director of Professional Standards. She immediately convenes the team of herself, the sergeant, and the manager, and they begin to work through the process of, can this situation be handled by a site supervisor, or is the allegation egregious enough where we need to involve one of our Broward School Police investigators? So they work through that process. If they can't come to consensus, they'll bring in Chief Azzarito and myself to assist in that conversation on certain instances. So if you look at the top of the slide where you see in yellow for the site-based action, you can see it starts, those are non-criminal. The work is done at the site level. You can see throughout that process every employee does receive due process in that process, even when it's a site-based investigation. And then after that due process meeting, the site-based supervisor will make a decision on what to recommend to the school board for discipline. At this time, we do not bring letters of reprimand to the school board. So when we bring discipline to the school board, it's a suspension or higher. So if the case goes to one of our investigators, our investigators, it starts with, we assign it to one of our 6 detectives. They have 84 days by policy to finalize the investigation. Once that investigation is finalized, their report is reviewed by both Sergeant Levine and Director Manzo, and they provide edits and recommendations. Then the report is finalized again. It is approved by both the director and the sergeant. And then after it is approved and finalized, there is a PSC meeting. This is the meeting where the employee and their union representative, if they choose, can come, and they have 20 minutes to present their case, have their opportunity to have their considerations heard. So who is currently on PSC? Our PSC committee currently has 3 principal supervisors. It has our manager of professional standards. It has the director of risk management. It has a director of transportation, and it has the director of safety, security, operations. And also, we have a representative of our legal team that also serves in that PSC meeting. So after that meeting, the PSC team makes a recommendation, and then it moves to the post-PSC meeting where Chief Azarito and myself, Sergeant Levine, Shirley Manza, we review the recommendation and the documentation provided by the PSC committee, and then we sign off on it. And then after we sign off on it, there is a pre-disciplinary meeting where the employee, again, has their right to hear the recommended discipline and present any information they would like to provide. Then after that pre-disciplinary meeting, the employee is notified of the discipline recommendation within 10 days. And then after that process, that's when you will see it end up on a board agenda. So I think it's important to understand that there is a clear process for how a discipline infraction for an employee ends up on a board agenda. It's not an arbitrarily made decision by one individual. It follows the workflow and processes outlined in the corrective action policy.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Lozano. On the page right after that, you'll see some abbreviations that were used throughout those flow charts. But going to page 11 now on the presentation. So it's important to reiterate what Mr. Lozano said about there's several layers of due process throughout the corrective action workflow. Once again, before something is placed on a board agenda, it's gone through several layers of compliance, due process, listening to the employee, their representation, and putting it all together before it's presented to the board. So once an item does come to the board, on items H2 and H4, those items that you'll see on there have been completed investigations. They've been through due process. They've been through compliance issues. Is that my mic? Oh, no. I'm sorry. The employee has received due process throughout the process. They have been told of their right to appeal or to grieve what the outcome is after the board action. And some of these, on those items, may also have stipulated agreements. These are where the employee has accepted the discipline and has chosen not to appeal or not to grieve it. So that's what you'll see on H2 and H4. On the C items, these are our certificated employees, our teachers, principals. This is the board is approving to send a discipline item to the Department of Administrative Hearings, or they're voting to approve the final order that comes back from DOA. There also may be settlement agreements on those C items that have a financial impact that have gone through that DOA process. And then finally, just wanted to talk to you about the employee's right to appeal. In policy 4015, which we attached to this item, is for non-union members. And then also in the collective bargaining agreements has a grievance procedure throughout each one, 4 steps, 3 steps, 5 steps. So the employees they know what this process is while they're going through it. They have the ability to grieve or to appeal what the final outcome is, what the final board approval is before the final action is taken. So we just wanted to reiterate that all of the items that are presented to the school board follow policy 4.9. They follow our procedures. Employees have their due process. Everything should be laid out and be ready to go before we bring it to the board. And with that, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on this item?
No public comment?
Okay, thank you. Board member discussion, Dr. Holness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and thank you so much, Mr. Lozano and Mr. Azarito. I am so happy to see that we are providing some sort of a suggested guideline, so that way we can make sure that when we are given discipline that it is equitable across the board. It's not subjective in any way. We have some sort of a direction. So I am happy to see this, and thank you so much for the work that you both put into this. So I have a couple of questions. You indicated that the suggestions were based on past incidents. Could you clarify that these are incidents that occur in Broward County schools, or is this collectively outside of the school district?
Dr. Hepburn.
Mr. Azarito.
Yeah, through the chair. This is from Broward County Schools.
Okay, so I do appreciate that. I would also prefer and love to see that we have the suggested outcome based upon what we've seen in other large school districts of similar size, similar demographics, and so on, to make sure that we are consistent with school districts across the nation that would mirror Broward County School District. So if you could take a look at that and see if we need to revise some of this suggested outcome, and not just based upon incidents that occur here. I think consistency with school districts that are similar would lend itself to probably discipline actions that may be more reflective and equitable across, as they're doing in other large districts. So that's what I would suggest. Also on page 5, I just need to clarify driving under the influence, and there is reprimand to 2-day suspension as the suggested outcome. And then you also have alcohol-related offenses, reprimand, 5-day suspension. So when you mention driving under the influence of what?
Dr. Hepburn.
Mr. Azarito.
It could be alcohol or any controlled substance.
Okay, so that in itself could create some confusion here, right? Because on item E, it says alcohol-related offenses. And then driving under the influence, if it is alcohol-related, would that fall under item E, or would that fall under item F? Because it would result in a different degree of punishment.
Correct. I would say the DUI would be, for me, the alcohol-related offense, and letter D, driving under the influence within the scope or work-related or happened on their work clock, where the DUI may not be, might be on the weekend or things like that. So I think that's the difference, but that's part of the clarification we need to kind of clean up in policy 4.9.
Okay, so driving under the influence obviously could include drugs, alcohol, anything of that sort. So I would, for alcohol-related offenses, I would think if someone is driving under the influence using alcohol, then that should be under item E, especially if it happens. And when you say driving under the influence, you mean outside of school property, or there?
I believe that's the intent, because letter D says driving DUI within the scope of employment, and then letter F is just driving under the influence. So I think that's where they're spelled out differently.
Okay, so letter D would be applicable to anyone who are driving within school district boundaries, correct?
While they're
while
they're working.
While they're working. Okay, and then F could be they're not working, but that could also include driving on school property or in public. I'm just trying to get clarification.
Yeah, I think the DUI could be off work. So if they're arrested for a DUI, and then we have their fingerprints, and we get a hit through.
Okay, so if someone is off work and they're driving under the influence and they're going to an event at a school property, but they're an employee and they're off work.
I see what you're asking. So they're going to a football game at night, so they're not on the clock, but they show up and get a
Right.
DUI. That's if you go back to the letter C in 4.9, that's one of those circumstances that we need to take into consideration. So there's a list of 20 different considerations that we look at to determine what the penalty will be within that penalty range. So again,
Okay.
was it on school property? Was it driving there? What was the event? So, I mean, there's a lot of information that we have to look at when we determine what the penalty would be.
Okay, so I would just suggest that, that is looked into a little bit more, to make sure that it is very clear as far as alcohol-related offenses and whether or not it's on school property, on school time or off school time, and so on and so forth. All right,
Got it.
all right, that's it.
Thank you. Dr. Zeman?
Thanks so much, Chair. I'm curious, Chair, do you know how long on average it takes to do the process that's shown on slide 9?
Dr. Hepburn?
Mr. Azarito?
Go ahead, Ms. Lozano.
So again, we are currently collecting that data. By policy, they have 84 days, but I can tell you that's one of our guardrails is to improve the number of days it takes to complete investigations. So we are currently working on ensuring that we are as expedient as we can be in conducting those investigations.
Chair, I wonder if the superintendent thinks we ought to look hard at this process map in terms of, does each step really represent a value add? Can there be either guidelines for the length of time for each step so people can understand kind of what the expectation is? And my concern is we get these things 6 to 12 months after the incident. I mean, that is my working number. I didn't go back and do the research on that, and I apologize for not knowing that number. But it's always important to have a nice, reasonable range associated with offenses, but it's also true the faster you apply the penalty, the more impact that it has, and the more clarity it gives to other people. Oh, my word, did you hear about the teacher at South Broward that did such and such? They got a 10-day suspension. If it happened last year or 9 months ago, I love the due process steps. I love giving people a chance to share new information and the like. But to the extent that a process map can be actually assessed to see if, do we really need all of these steps? And is there a way to get more? I'm sorry, Chair, that was a question, and I turned it into an essay. I apologize for that. But would it make sense for the superintendent, would he consider like looking at this to see if there's a way to provide either fewer steps or some kind of time stamp on the steps so that we might get these things faster as a board?
Go ahead, Mr. Lozano.
So we just transitioned, to having everything in one department, and I think one of the biggest positives is when you have the director, the sergeant, and the manager sit together. We're handling a lot of investigations through the site-based process that aren't where we don't necessarily need an investigator, and that process is completed much more efficient and timely than the process that when we go through an investigator and it may take 6 to 12 months.
No, and again, I'm not trying to impose, or nor do I think it's even wise to say, other than the 84 days for the investigation, this step has to be 3 days, because there's a lot of variance in these offenses. So, but as a board member, I always feel better if I can say, oh, that happened a few months ago, not last year. And I also know the faster we get to the eventual consequence, the more impact that consequence has on that person and on everyone else in that class of employees. So it really, there's lots of value in going quicker. I just wanted to make that point. If I could also ask, Chair, on slide 5 and 6, we have A through R of all these offenses. Is this a Broward County School definition of offenses, or did this come from someone else?
Dr. Hepburn?
Mr. Azarito.
That is a great question. So on page 1, it has definitions. It talks about different things, but you're talking about the specific offenses?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Seaman? I wasn't here in 2018 when they were putting this policy together. Some of the items are similar to what I've used in other districts, and some are very specific to Broward. Ernie may have some more.
And most of these are statute-driven, and the language is from statute.
Terrific, and I get that. I'm just going to give you a few comments on the ranges that are roughly being put in here. First is a question on D, driving under the influence within the scope of employment. So this is someone at work, charged, and if found guilty will face this outcome range on the right. So this is someone driving under the influence, either a school bus driver, somebody taking kids on a field trip in some other vehicle, someone got forced into driving a kid home after school because the bus didn't come and parents don't have a car. All these I think are using your car within the scope of employment. Are you saying that the minimum outcome range for that under the suggested is a 10-day suspension?
That is the